Hi, I'm Stephen Newton, and in this series of videos, I'm intending to share some of the knowledge, the experience, the tips, the tricks, the hacks that I've discovered over more than 60 years of fly fishing, which make my fishing more enjoyable, more effective. Um, I've been very fortunate to have fished in many parts of the UK, in Europe, in Scandinavia, and of course over in the US. And nowadays, I'm really blessed because most of my fishing time is spent on southern English chalk streams. I do fish elsewhere, and I also fish still waters as well as in streams. But my focus these days is not so much on catching more fish or bigger fish, but on really challenging more difficult fish. So my preference is to fish in small streams for those rather more difficult, challenging trout. Now, in this particular video, I'm going to try and answer a question which I get asked quite frequently, and that is some variation of, is high-end gear worth the money? So before we begin, let's just try and define what high-end gear is. And in my opinion, high-end gear would, for a fly rod, would constitute something that sells for somewhere north of £700, and for reels, probably north of about £400. Now, obviously, I'm based in the UK, so I think in terms of pounds sterling, British pounds. Um, but because we in this country tend to quote prices for gear, including VAT, that's value added tax, our sales tax, and that runs at 20% presently. Um, in the US, typically prices are quoted excluding sales tax. So even allowing for differences in exchange rates, import duties, tariffs, all of that good stuff, if I'm talking about a rod that costs £300 in this country, then that same rod, if it's available in the US, will typically sell for around about $300. So the point is, don't worry too much about the currency units. Just focus on the price numbers rather than whether it's dollars, pounds, euros, whatever. So for fly rods, what is it that actually makes the difference between a £1,000 plus rod and one that costs maybe 10% of that, a fraction of that price? So there's a number of factors involved. Primarily, it will be how the blank is made, or more importantly, what the blank material is. And although most modern rods are made of carbon fibre of one sort or another, there is a difference in the nature of that carbon fibre. So you'll often see rods referred to in catalogues as, or on websites as being either high modulus or as it might be 30-ton or 40-ton carbon. And these really refer to the stiffness of the carbon fibre material. The higher the ton number or the higher the modulus, the stiffer that material is. And what that means is that rod designers, rod manufacturers can make blanks which are thinner, have thinner walls, and are therefore lighter, whilst retaining their strength. And the benefits of that are twofold. Firstly, the rod overall is lighter. Secondly, because it is stiffer, the rod recovers more quickly from being flexed. So when you do the well-known fly shop waggle of your rod, or you're out casting flies on the river, you make the cast, the rod tip will cease to vibrate, will recover to its original position more quickly. And that means that you can potentially cast slightly greater distances, but more importantly, the accuracy of your cast will be improved. So essentially what you're getting with a high-end rod is typically a stiffer, faster recovery blank that gives you potentially greater distance, don't always need that, but also does tend to deliver greater accuracy. It will also tend to be useful for giving rods with a faster action. So that is around where the rod flexes when it's under stress. And a fast action refers typically to a rod that flexes more towards the tip than it does towards the butt. Other factors that define a high-end rod as opposed to one that is perhaps less costly, maybe slightly softer in action, etc. It's not just about the weight and the stiffness of the rod, but it's about the build quality and the quality of the components used, particularly the reel seat, the guides, the cork and the handle. Now, none of these things in and of themselves will make the rod more or less fishable, and so these are things that are in a way at the margin. But what you're paying for with a high-end rod is the stiffness and the quality of the blank and the quality of the components. Does that, in my opinion, justify a tenfold increase in price over a base model rod? Honestly, I'm not sure. But that said, I think if you can afford such a rod and it gives you pleasure, you like to use it more than you would a less costly rod, that's absolutely fine. Will you catch more fish? Not necessarily, because your ability to catch fish is not down to the tools you use. It's about the person actually holding the rod, making the casts, etc. In terms of high-end reels, again, what's the difference you're going to experience? Well, I think maybe you would get a slightly lighter reel, but you would actually get the high end of the market, by which I mean reels costing more than about £400. You're going to get something typically that is fully machined. So you'll start out with a block of bar stock aluminium, aluminum to our American cousins, and that will be cut with a CNC machine to form both the frame of the reel and the reel drum itself. And that will be a stronger reel, potentially a lighter reel, and it can be made to higher tolerances. The alternative is what's known as a die cast reel. So this is a reel that is aluminium still, but made through a casting process, maybe finished with a machining process, and that'll be an absolutely fine reel. The tolerances will be less tight, and if you drop it, then it's more prone to damage. The other alternative, which is lower cost yet, of course, is molded plastic, perfectly fine reels, but not terribly strong. And we're going to talk in future videos about how to go about choosing rods and reels. But I think the short answer is, although I own a couple of high-end rods and I own at least one high-end reel, I'm not entirely convinced that the relatively small improvements in performance that I experience justify the very significant increases in cost, certainly not in my hands. Doesn't mean to say that it's not a good thing to do if you can afford it, but I think certainly as a less experienced angler, a beginner, there's absolutely no need to rush out and spend £1,000 plus on a rod, or £400, £500, £600 on a reel. There is a law of diminishing returns in terms of the money you spend, and I'm going to cover some of these other factors and what I feel about certain individual rods and reels in future videos. So to answer the question simply, is high-end gear worth the money? Not necessarily, and in my opinion, by no means always, certainly not for me. I tend to favour lower cost equipment which does an effective, good, sound job in my hands. I hope that's been useful, and more in the next video.